Chapter 1 300 Years Frozen, Disaster Rain Season. The torrential rain arrived without warning. The sun-drenched sky was instantly swallowed by dark, brooding clouds, and a deluge poured down the impoverished residents.
Just venturing out for some fresh air, scrambled back into their homes, terrified of being drenched. The rainwater quickly accumulated in the streets, rapidly spreading throughout the slums.
Several low-lying dwellings were already inundated up to their thresholds. The neglected drainage system proved utterly useless, and in moments, the entire outer slum was transformed into a vast expanse of water, in the Meishan orphanage.
At the entrance of the residential building, a woman appearing to be in her 30s led a dozen or so children, aged between 7 or 8 and 11 or 12, frantically moving pre-made sandbags to pile them up against the thresholds.
Floodwaters, duty and hurry and help, it's no use, has a fool. How infuriating! Several boys, sweating profusely from carrying sandbags, glared at a small boy silently standing by the window, knowing it was futile to call him.
They gritted their teeth and continued piling sandbags at the entrance. The boy by the window looked to be 7 or 8 years old, thin but tall for his age, almost as tall as 11 or 12-year-olds.
His most striking feature was his skin, exceedingly pale, almost sickly so. It was a stark contrast to the other children, whose skin was dark and grimy from the sun and UV radiation, a difference that filled many of them with envy. But Dudian sighed inwardly.
This was the aftereffect of the cryogenic chamber. Although he had been out for over 3 months, his body hadn't recovered. He felt constantly weak in modern medical terms. He suffered from myasthenia gravis. Even standing was an effort.
Let alone carrying sandbags to block the rain, however. His condition was fortunate compared to what could have been. After all, when the disaster struck China,
the research institute had only just completed the first cryogenic chamber. It hadn't even entered the experimental phase. No one knew what kind of malfunctions might occur. His survival, intact, for 300 years within the chamber was a small miracle.
He had survived, but his parents and sister, the creators of the cryogenic chamber, had remained behind, facing that terrifying disaster. Even if they had miraculously survived, 300 years had passed.
And they were long lost to the dust of time. In this vast world he was utterly alone without a single relative, destined to face the world in solitude. He wasn't despairing. Though he had grieved and sorrowed, his parents had given him 2 leave.
He would never allow himself to fall into despair. He would not only live, but live a life worthy of pride. A life that would make his deceased parents and sister proud. Thankfully, heaven ultimately protected humankind.
When he first crawled out of the cryogenic chamber, he had thought he was the only one left on Earth, the last surviving life. It wasn't until he left the junkyard where the chamber was buried that he discovered humanity hadn't been extinguished.
A few had survived the catastrophe, and after 300 years of reproduction and development, they had formed a sizable population. Sadly, the civilization and technology of 300 years ago had been completely destroyed by disaster.
In the time he'd been here, he hadn't seen or heard anything that symbolized the technology of the old era. It was as if in retribution, humanity had not only lost the power to conquer this planet, but even basic survival had become extremely difficult.
As his thoughts drifted, the storm outside gradually subsided. Seeing that the water level at the doorstep had stopped rising, everyone in the house breathed a sigh of relief. As if they had just endured a protracted battle, everyone felt utterly exhausted.
At this time, the middle-aged woman glanced at the sky. Seeing that the dark clouds were gradually parting slightly, revealing a murky light, she knew it wouldn't rain again for a while. She immediately said, "Let's go to the dining hall to eat."
Put on your wax grass shoes. At the mention of food, the children's eyes lit up, and their previous fatigue vanished. Each returned to their room to put on their wax grass shoes and obediently lined up. "Dean, come and put on your shoes, it's time to eat."
A voice called out from the back of the line. It was an 8 or 9-year-old boy. As soon as he finished speaking, he seemed to remember something, slapped his forehead, and came forward to pat Dudian on the shoulder. He gestured with one hand,
pointing towards the dining hall, while the other sleeve hung empty. Dudian remembered him. His name was Barton, one of the few children in the orphanage who showed him kindness. This was probably related to his own situation.
300 years of change had completely revamped the language. When he first arrived at the orphanage, he couldn't understand what others were saying, nor could he speak their language. He could only remain silent. Over time,
everyone thought he was a bit dull and possibly had intellectual disabilities. So, naturally, he was categorized with deformed children like Barton.
The children in the orphanage were divided into 2 groups: those who were physically sound but abandoned by their parents, and those who were physically deformed and abandoned. In this world, even children had already learned to survive in groups.
Dudian nodded, indicating he understood, and then followed Barton to the back of the line. Barton was just about to tell Dudian to change into his wax grass shoes when he unintentionally looked down and discovered that Dudian was already wearing a pair of light green
high-top shoes. He was speechless. In this world, plastic hadn't yet been invented. Wax grass shoes and clothing were the most commonly used rain gear. This was a naturally mutated grass, readily available everywhere.
Its large leaves and the minutely raised waxy layer on their surface effectively blocked radiation and rainwater, making it a household essential. Everyone carefully walked along a narrow, half-meter-high path paved with stones in front of the threshold.
The rainwater only reached their ankles, but if anyone were to fall, even the strongest adult would inevitably fall ill. Upon reaching the dining hall, everyone immediately scrambled for seats.
The limited number of seats were instantly occupied by the able-bodied children. Dudian, Barton, and the other children with deformities were used to this. They went to a corner at the back where a few stacked stones served as their table. Did you hear?
Among the adopters who came this time, there are doctors and wall builders. Aunt Di told us to seize this opportunity and perform well. If we could be adopted by a doctor, it would be so fortunate. I'd rather be adopted by a wall builder.
Maybe I'd have a chance to climb the Sylvia Great Wall and see the world beyond. Before the food arrived, Barton and a few other children whispered amongst themselves. These children were missing an ear,
or had half their face covered in small lumps of flesh. None of them looked normal. Dudian heard their conversation. His eyes flickered, but he remained silent. It's a pity Dean's mind isn't right otherwise, with Dean's looks and physique.
He would surely have been chosen. After chatting for a while, Barton sighed suddenly, glancing at Dudian with regret. The other children, seeing Dudian's lack of reaction, shook their heads and sighed.
They had long ago agreed that whoever was adopted would do their best to return and help those left behind. In terms of appearance, Dudian was undoubtedly the most likely to be adopted, but his mental condition was far worse than any physical ailment.
For example, the child with the lumpy half-face, though frightening in appearance, was physically sound and mentally competent. At least he could do manual labor and find a job. Humph, a bunch of defective things, still trying to compete with us for adoption.
A thin child sitting nearby overheard Barton and the others sneering contemptuously. His words immediately drew the attention of others, and for a moment, disdainful and disgusted glances fell upon Dudian, Barton and the rest.
Compared to the deformed children, those who were physically sound but abandoned harbored even deeper resentment. Dudian glanced at them indifferently, saying nothing. Although he was a child, he had seen much,
possessing a depth of understanding that many adults lacked. But this demeanor, in the eyes of these children, was simply stupidity. Look at this fool, he doesn't even understand when he's being scolded. A brain-damaged guy. No wonder he was abandoned.
Thinking of being adopted? Just wait until you're 13 and get thrown into the mines. These children did not hide their scorn and disgust, even finding amusement in it. At that moment, the food was brought in.
The middle-aged woman who had brought them there said sharply, "Quiet down, or you won't get to eat." Hearing this, the children's boisterous behavior subsided. They looked innocent, as if nothing had happened. The next day,
the silver, gray clouds gradually parted, and sunlight spilled down onto the slum. During the rainy season, this was a rare and precious clear day, and it was a particularly long-awaited day for the children of Mason Orphanage. Adoption Day!
All the families who had made appointments arrived at the orphanage that day to choose a child they liked. Early that morning, Dudian woke up on time. Although this world lacked alarm clocks, his biological clock never failed him.
After tidying his bedding and washing his face and hands with simply filtered well water, he picked up another set of his bleached, coarse cloth clothes from beside his pillow. Just as he was about to change, he felt a soft lump inside. Pulling it out,
he saw it was a purple handkerchief, crumpled into a ball. Dudian paused, instantly remembering the little girl who had led him to this orphanage on that cold night. Unfortunately, it was too dark to see her face clearly.
In the 3 months he'd been at the orphanage, he knew that only people from the affluent upper district could afford such fine cloth. The handkerchief still bore traces of the dark grime wiped from his face, stubbornly resisting being washed clean.
After a moment of silence, Dudian tucked the handkerchief into his bosom, then changed his clothes and rushed to the open space outside the orphanage. Although he only had one set of parents in his heart, he had to make himself adoptable as soon as possible.
Children who were not adopted by the age of 13 would be abandoned by the orphanage and sent to the mines controlled by the Maishan Coal Merchant Association behind the Maishan Orphanage, becoming
free laborers until they died of exhaustion or old age, never to see the light of day again. Like Dudian, all the children in the orphanage were dressed up that day,
each one washing themselves clean and putting on clothes they had been reluctant to wear for a long time. Coarse cloth clothes given to them upon their arrival at the orphanage. If your body emits an odor, no one will want to approach you.
This was Aunt Day's warning to them. Looking around, a large group of children stood on the rain-soaked sandy ground in front of the orphanage. subtly divided into two camps, the whole and the deformed. Once all the children were in place,
The adults who had come to adopt them, led by Aunt Di and other caregivers, came before the children, sizing up the orphans who might become their own. Hello, uncles and Endurande's guidance.
except for Dudian and a few other deformed children who couldn't speak. The other children all called out politely, their bright eyes full of innocence, their faces filled with longing and hope as they met the adults' gazes.
This fervent gaze moved some adults to a sigh of pity. Quick Dudian, thin but tall, became the focus of all the adults. His snow-white skin was striking, and his temperament was completely different from the other children.
The adults couldn't quite put their finger on what made him different, only that he was exceptionally composed, possessing an air of nobility. Yes, nobility. This surprised many adults. They hadn't expected to find such a promising talent in a slum orphanage.
Many adults were immediately captivated. Chapter 2A, The Regulatory Role of Law. In the quiet library, Dudian stood before the law section, holding a basic law textbook and reading silently. Since the third month,
He had spent 10 minutes each day in the library studying law, the most time he could spare. Dean, why are you looking at law again? Teacher said there's a test today and we need to review. If we fail, we'll be eliminated, Macon said from the geology section.
looking at Dudian, who was once again at the law shelves, a little speechless. Dudian gestured with a hand. He didn't look up, continuing to focus on his law textbook. 10 minutes passed quickly, though had only reached the middle of a section.
He closed the book, put it back and returned to the botany section. He expertly pulled out a book called Complete Botany, flipped through it, quickly reviewed it, confirmed he hadn't missed anything, returned it to the shelf, and turned to leave Dean.
Macon hurried to catch up. Do you think we'll be tested on? I don't know, Dudian answered honestly. I hope it's not geological surveying. I haven't had time to study that. Macon's eyes twinkled. How about this? If it's something I know, it'll help you.
And if it's something you know, you'll help me. Deal. We're not even going to try cheating with our pathetic skills, Dudian said impatiently. But give it a try, secretly, Macon said with a bitter face. I don't want to be eliminated.
Teacher Tob didn't say that those eliminated will lose their eligibility to be guards. And the training fees for this period will have to be paid by ourselves. My family can't afford such expensive fees, Dudian shrugged, indicating his helplessness. Indeed.
On the third day of training, Tob had said this, but Dudian had already known that this training camp was nominally for selecting guards, but actually to train scavengers, so most of those eliminated would still become guards. Tob's words were a clear giveaway,
confirming Dudian's suspicions. Of course, for the other children, this was undoubtedly devastating news. It was these words that made many children who had already wanted to give up grit their teeth and persevere. Soon,
the two arrived at the drill ground before the stipulated time. Many people had already gathered there, whispering and speculating about the nature of the exam. Not long after, Tob appeared on time. Before his arrival, everyone was standing neatly in formation,
their posture impeccable, a lesson many had learned through painful experience. However, Tob didn't appear alone this time. Beside him was a slender, tall, and graceful figure, a girl in her early 20s, with wheat-colored skin.
Her face was free of childishness, full of mature and sexy charm, yet retaining the youthful aura of her age. A faint smile played on her lips, causing many of the teenage boys to gape in astonishment. Actually, precociousness isn't unique to this world.
Even in the old times, teenagers understood certain aspects far more than adults presumed. In this world, 13 is the legal age for marriage, and by 20, a woman is considered a spinster after all, under the corrosive effects of radiation.
Most people are lucky to live to 60. Sensing the restlessness in the eyes of the older children, Tob chuckled coldly, his voice as low and gravelly as ever. Over these past 3 months,
you trash have barely managed to acquire the basic qualifications of a guard. From today onwards, there will be a major examination every 6 months. Anyone who fails will be eliminated. A subtle tension flickered across the faces of all the children.
Dudian also realized this exam was far from a simple knowledge test. Soon Tob's words confirmed his suspicions. This assessment is simple. Later, instructor Chris will send you to a location. You only need to survive there for 10 days to pass.
Chapter 3, A New Beginning. Doctor. At Dudian's words, a young woman in a gray and white long coat in the crowd's eyes lit up. She said to Dudian, "Little one, I am a doctor. Would you like to be my child?" Dudian had already noticed her.
He hadn't expected her to speak up before he could ask. He had been prepared to risk refusing the gardener, assuming others would be afraid to offend him and wouldn't choose him. Now, it seemed the gardener's status wasn't so terrifying after all.
Dudian didn't know that doctors were even rarer in this world than he imagined. Although still a civilian profession, it was one of the few civilian professions that could interact with the nobility. If the steward of the Mel family had come,
no one would have dared to take the child he had chosen. But a mere gardener could only intimidate ordinary civilians like miners and tailors. Dudian looked at her properly for the first time, Her facial features were soft, and when she smiled,
she had two shallow dimples. It reminded him of his mother's gentle expression when she prepared breakfast for him. His heart ached, and after a moment of silent contemplation he softly nodded, willing.
The previous middle-aged man's face turned slightly unpleasant, but after looking at the young woman, he refrained from saying anything. He secretly felt sorry for Dudian. After all, he was too young and inexperienced, although being a doctor's child was good.
Not every doctor's child could learn their parents' skills. It was an extremely difficult profession to enter. If one spent a lot of energy and still didn't learn, it would be too late to change careers, and they would only become low-level laborers.
But the gardener was different. As long as one had a good memory, they could quickly learn, and as a gardener for the Mel family, they could immediately leave the dirty slums and inherit his gardener status in the future, living in the Mel family for life.
This was something others wouldn't dare dream of. What a pity! The middle-aged man shook his head. The other children, upon seeing the young, professional woman Dr. Chu's Dudian, couldn't help but look grim.
The deformed children like Barton fared a little better, while a touch of jealousy was present. Envy was more dominant. For the healthy children, however, it was as if Dudian had snatched their precious opportunity, leaving them resentful and envious.
Aunt Day's eyes crinkled with amusement. Dudian was one of the few children in the orphanage she found pleasing. Whether he was a bit slow didn't matter. At least his skin was fair and clean, a pleasant sight. Turning to the young woman, she said,
Dudian is very well behaved and obedient here. I hope you'll take good care of him, and I wish your family happiness. I will, the young woman replied with a bright smile, her heart filled with joy. Mina, take them to handle the registration procedures.
Aunt Di instructed the middle-aged woman beside her. The woman, Mina, beckoned to Dudian, smiling at the young woman. Come with me, Dean. Hang in there, Dean. Don't forget us. Remember to visit us when you can.
Barton and the other deformed children were reluctant to let him go. Dudian had received considerable care from them over the past 3 months. He smiled faintly. I'll be back, but don't be too disheartened. Perhaps when I return, you'll all have been adopted.
Barton and the other deformed children, though realistic about their prospects, still laughed. I'll choose you. Just as Dudian was about to leave, he heard the middle-aged gardener say this. He looked over and saw the gardener pointing at Lisa in the crowd.
Smiling little girl, you're quite well behaved. How about becoming my daughter? Lisa stared at him, a look of disbelief on her face. The other healthy children surrounding her looked at her with envy. Dudian glanced at them, then withdrew his gaze.
Walking to Aunt Mina, he followed her and the woman who would soon become his adoptive mother, leaving the open space. From that day on, he and the other children from the orphanage would each live in their own families.
Separated and perhaps never to meet again, the orphanage's adoption procedures were simple. First, verification of the adopter's identity. Second, verification of the adopter's employment.
The first 2 points aim to confirm whether the adopter meets the legal requirements for adoption. Those without a job, or whose job is the cheapest kind of manual labor, are ineligible to adopt a child. The final, third point is the signing of the contract,
confirming the adoption relationship between both parties and transferring the orphanage's registration of Dudian to the adopter's name. Lastly, and most importantly, the adoption fee. Yes, this is the main source of income for orphanages in this world.
In the old days, orphanages only required adopters to meet the adoption conditions, not money. But it's different here. While it's called adoption, it's essentially a sale, similar in a way to human trafficking in the old days. The only difference being that here,
it's legal. Dudian hadn't seen the currency of this world before. He only saw his nominal mother pull out a thick stack of green banknotes, roughly the same size as the banknotes of the old days, with a tall, imposing city wall printed on.
Much like the Sylvia wall. Seeing her hand the clearly pre-counted banknotes to Aunt Mina, who was beaming, Dudian finally understood why they had so readily accepted him when he first arrived at the orphanage.
Despite the orphanage's meager resources and dilapidated surroundings, they had selflessly shared their food and shelter with him, a complete stranger. He realized that his short months at the orphanage had brought them a considerable sum of money.
He sighed softly. Dudian felt he should properly understand the differences between the two worlds. Survival of the fittest, either adapt to this world, or make this world adapt to him. After paying the adoption fee,
the young woman put away the signed contract, bent down, stroked Dudian's hair and said gently, "Child, I am your mother from now on. My name is Julia." Looking into her light brown eyes, Dudian knew this woman would be his only support as he grew up.
Then said, "Can I call you Aunt Julia?" Jura paused slightly. Mina, who was organizing contracts nearby, lightly scolded, "Don't be disrespectful. From now on, she's your mother, be good to her.
And don't disgrace our orphanage's reputation." "It's all right," Jura smiled gently, stroking Dudian's hair. "You can call me Aunt Jura for now. I'll wait until you're comfortable." A warmth spread through Dudian's heart. He softly said, "Thank you." He was truly grateful.
He knew that once adopted, His life and death rested entirely in the hands of his adoptive parents. He had also heard from other children that in this world, even if parents killed their own children, it was legal. Jura smiled slightly. Let's go home.
I'll take you to see your new house. Jura's home was in a residential area. This area housed ordinary working residents, and the living environment was worlds apart from the slums. The air alone was much fresher, devoid the stench of feces and rotting refuse.
Within the vast residential area, Jura lived in relatively comfortable circumstances, residing in the south, where land prices were double those in the north. The north bordered the slums, while the south was closer to the commercial district.
Those who lived in the commercial district were either high-ranking military officials or wealthy merchants. The money they casually spent was an astronomical sum that residents in the residential area could never earn in a lifetime.
Imposing walls separated each district, with gates that opened only during the day. A strict hierarchy was maintained, encapsulated in a saying whispered within the Sylvia walls: north, not south.
The north was the slum district, south of the slum lay the residential area. The saying meant that residents could freely go to the slums, and those in the commercial district could freely go to the residential area. However,
it was absolutely forbidden for anyone from the slums to enter the residential area and vice versa. Chapter 40 Night. Jula produced a key ring and with a click, opened the door. Dudian looked at the slowly opening house,
knowing this would be his home for the foreseeable future. Dean, come in. Jula took a pair of adult cotton shoes from a small cabinet by the door, deliberately waving them in front of Dudian as if to cheer him up. These are your uncle's shoes, wear them for now.
I'll take you to buy a new pair before curfew tonight. Dudian paused for a moment, then understood. One of the conditions for adopting a child was being married, meaning he had an unseen nominal father. He automatically removed his dirty, coarse linen shoes.
The rough shoes had left several painful red marks on his feet. When he put on the clean cotton shoes, a wave of comfort washed over him. Come, let me wash you up first, Jula said warmly. Dudian had expected a comfortable bath,
but instead saw her simply wetting a towel with warm water, wringing it out, and using it to wipe his face and arms. The washing method was exactly the same as in the orphanage, only the water was far purer. Dudian didn't know that in this world,
including among the nobles, this dry cleaning method was the common way to bathe. The widespread belief was that water weakened the body's functions and reduced disease resistance. Even the cleanest nobles only took a full bath 1 or 2 times a year.
Afterward, Jura took Dudian's rough-spun clothes to be processed, leaving him to familiarize himself with the house. Dudian wandered around the room. As he expected, he didn't see any technologically advanced items, not even a simple spring wound clock.
Furthermore, he saw an old-fashioned loom, the kind he'd only encountered in fairy tales. He recalled that the setting of that particular story seemed to be medieval Europe, before the steam age, although a single loom couldn't definitively prove anything.
Considering everything he'd seen in the past few months, Dudian was certain that the civilization level of this post-disaster world had only just reached the Bronze Age before the Steam Age. They had only recently learned to utilize metal.
This discovery planted certain thoughts in his mind. Evening approached, the sky darkening, and the air growing colder. It looked like it might rain again. Worried that Dudian might be afraid of the dark, Jura lit an oil lamp early.
Flickering light danced across Dudian's face. Each time she saw it, Jura felt a sense of wonder. His skin was so fair, whiter than even hers. It's going to rain, Dudian said. Glancing out the window, Jura smiled,
thinking what a well-behaved child he was. Your uncle is rushing to finish a batch of goods these past few days, so he won't be back tonight. Are you hungry? What do you want to eat? I'll make it. Anything will do. Such a good boy, Jula said
Then let me treat you to some of my cooking. I guarantee you'll love it. A month passed in the blink of an eye. Dudian had already met his nominal father, a tall and thin middle-aged man named Gray. He was unremarkable in appearance,
with a gentle personality much like Jula's. He was a tailor. The loom in their house served as his workbench. During the black snow season he would bring his work home, as the factories lacked charcoal and coal stoves.
Jula's adoption of Dudian was clearly something they had discussed beforehand. When Gray first saw Dudian, his expression mirrored that of the adults at the orphanage. Utter astonishment.
Upon learning that Dudian was only slightly autistic and had no other problems, his satisfaction was so great that he couldn't stop smiling for days. Night. Another violent storm, common during the disaster rain season, descended.
The rain fell in a steady drizzle. Sleeping in his small room, Dudian suddenly opened his eyes and sat up, realizing it had been a nightmare. He found himself drenched in cold sweat, his clothes clinging uncomfortably to his skin. He shifted his clothes.
Feeling a sudden urge to urinate, he quietly got out of bed, put on his shoes, and gently opened his door. He noticed a faint yellow light seeping from under the door of Jula and Gray's room across the hall, and paused. They weren't asleep yet.
Dudian's heart pounded, his thoughts racing. He unconsciously approached their door. The building materials in this world clearly had considered soundproofing. At least, Jula's house hadn't. Faint sounds drifted from the room. Are you sure you want to do this?
It was Jula's voice, hesitant. I know you're fond of the child and so am I, to be honest. I hate to part with him, but this is a rare opportunity. If he's chosen by Miss Elvie, we can move to the commercial district. We'll find better work there.
And if you get lonely, we can adopt another child. We can afford it. It's not about money. I'm worried. If Dudian marries into the Elvie family, he's not a talkative child. He'll be bullied. They're from completely different worlds.
I've seen those girls who marry into wealthy families when treating patients, they live like servants. Some even worse. The room was silent for a moment. Then Gray's voice resumed. Jula, you should think of it this way. As a slum orphan.
If he were adopted by some peasant family, his life would be far worse than a servant's. The chance to live as a servant in the Elvie household is something many would envy. All right, it's decided. Whether it works out or not is another matter.
Silence fell over the room. The small figure by the door also fell silent. He clenched his small fists tightly, then slowly unfurled them, turned, and walked back to his room as if dragging his feet, forgetting even his earlier need to use the toilet.
Sitting on his bed, Dudian listened to the whispering rain outside, and suddenly felt a sharp pain in his heart, though he always considered Jula and her husband as his nominal parents. Their attentive care over the past month had moved him deeply,
stirring warmth in his heart. But now, the world seemed to cruelly shatter the tender beauty he had found. In the dead of night he felt profoundly alone. He suddenly longed for his knowledgeable, stern yet gentle father and mother.
And his sister who always loved to pinch his ears. Why is it that the only one left is this incompetent me? He clenched his fists, yet felt utterly powerless. He didn't know how long it had been. But slowly, an idea began to bloom in his heart.
Since he could never see his parents and sister again, then he would make this strange world return to the form he once knew. No one knew that on this rainy night, the gears of history were slowly turning.
Driven by the chest of this insignificant figure lost in the darkness. Chapter 5's A Different World. The next day, morning, at the dining table, Gray sat at the head, holding a local newspaper delivered that morning.
It contained news from various parts of the residential area, along with recruitment information from several factories. Jula busied herself in the kitchen, preparing breakfast and serving it to the table. Everything as usual.
Dudian's biological clock went off on time. After getting up, he neatly folded his bedding, rinsed his face and mouth with filtered well water, and came to the dining room. He greeted Jula and her husband with a good morning, and tiptoeing onto his chair,
began eating the breakfast roll prepared for him. Jula, having finished her chores, sat opposite Dudian, smiling. How is it? Do you like the taste today? A little spicy, Dudian said, taking a bite. I like spicy food, that's good.
Gray put down the newspaper, glancing at Dudian, who was hunched over his meal. Dean, your aunt and I have arranged a marriage for you. Get ready today, dress nicely, and we'll take you to meet them later, at Dudian's request.
Gray and Jula temporarily referred to themselves as uncle and aunt. Dear it comes. After last night's buffer, he was now calm. He feigned bewilderment and asked, marriage, what's a marriage? Jula glanced at him and whispered to Gray, see.
I told you Dean is too young. We can wait a few more years for marriage. At 13, she was of legal marrying age. Gray looked at her, his gaze seeming to chill slightly, before saying, we're just going to get engaged. A few years early isn't a bad thing, Jula.
Seeing her husband's mind was made up, sighed inwardly and said nothing more. Gray turned to Dudian and said, in a bit, we're going to take you to meet a beautiful big sister. You have to seize the opportunity and do your best to gain her approval. If you do,
you'll be able to eat lots of delicious food every day, wear nice clothes, and never go hungry again, understand? Really, I will. Dudian's heart remained calm, but his face showed surprise. After all, life was a stage, and acting was key.
A smile finally appeared on Gray's face. He said, good boy, Diane is a good child. Come, let's eat first soon. The three finished their meal. Dudian's eager and enthusiastic performance put Gray's mind at ease.
All that remained was to see if the young lady would take a liking to Diane. Come, don't rush. Change into your new clothes first. Jula took a brand new black suit, a bright red tie and polished shoes from the cupboard for Dudian to change into. When he emerged,
neatly dressed, Jula and Gray's eyes lit up. The young nobleman's attire suited Dudian perfectly. His pale skin made him look exceptionally fair, and his dark, lustrous eyes shone like stars. As beautiful, Jula exclaimed sincerely. Gray overjoyed.
Dudian's excitement was palpable. Jula was the last to leave. Locking the door behind her, she reached the street by the lawn's railing and said to Gray, who was holding Dudian's hand, this early, no carriages come this way.
Do they? Gray smiled slightly. I've already made arrangements. Ivy's family said they'd send someone to pick us up. As he spoke, the distinct clip-clop of horses' hooves sounded from the street corner. Dudian saw a magnificent cat
with gold speeding towards them. A silver, white flag, bearing a white flower emblem, adorned its roof. The driver, in a black top hat and black suit, pulled the carriage to a stop before them. He hopped down, his posture ramrod straight,
and smiled politely. "Are you Mr. Gray and Miss Jula? The young lady is already awaiting you, please. Get in." He offered a hand to the carriage, a gesture of refined aristocratic etiquette. Gray's heart skipped a beat. Slightly overwhelmed, he stammered.
"How could we trouble the young lady to wait for us? It's terribly impolite. Get in." He quickly lifted Dudian into the carriage. At that moment, the driver seemed to notice Dudian, a flicker of surprise crossing his eyes,
Quickly replaced by a polite smile. Clip-clop. Once everyone was settled, the driver gathered the reins and the carriage sped off. Dudian quietly watched the buildings whizzing by, the pedestrians scattering to make way, and the surprise.
awe-struck gazes cast upon the carriage. Gray and Jula remained silent, avoiding any further instructions to Dudian lest they be overheard by the driver and relayed to Ivy's family. The carriage, gliding smoothly, soon passed beneath the massive southern wall.
The young guards at the city gate, seeing the white flower flag on the carriage's roof, stepped aside, raising their fists to their chests in salute. Once the carriage had passed, they resumed their duties,
Checking the identities of those attempting to enter the commercial district. Is this the commercial district? Dudian gazed out of the carriage window at the clean streets and the elegantly dressed passersby.
immediately sensing the difference from the residential area. Compared to the slums, it was truly heaven and earth, no exaggeration at all. Soon, the carriage stopped in front of an elegant and exquisite building at the end of the street.
Dudian saw a cardboard sign of a piano hanging on the building, painted with remarkable realism. He was surprised this poor, broken world still had pianos. The carriage stopped right in front of the entrance. A young man in a black suit quickly approached,
Looked at Gray and Jula as they alighted, and said with a smile, "The lady has been waiting for some time, please this way." He turned and led the way. Gray, looking at the magnificent and exquisite building, something impossible to see in the residential area,
felt a strange nervousness. He straightened his back, held Dudian's hand, and walked ahead, entering the hall. The brilliant light of oil lamps, like sparkling carnelian gems, illuminated the faces of Gray and his wife.
Jola held up relatively well. She had been invited to the commercial district a few times for treatment and was slightly calmer. This was Gray's first time in such a place, and Dudian, feeling the man's hand trembling slightly with tension,
Shook his head inwardly. Gentle music, like flowing water, drifted through the air. Dudian looked around. The hall was extremely spacious, with many people sitting there, enjoying pastries, listening to music and chatting softly.
They were all dressed in magnificent clothes, the fabrics finer than the thread and cotton used in the residential area, silks, velvets, in vibrant colors, a stark contrast to the plain, earth-toned clothes common in the residential area.
The young man in black suit gestured lightly, leading them to a separate seat inside. Dudian looked over. Two figures were sitting there, a middle-aged beauty, around 30 years old, in an exquisitely tailored dress.
With a pleasant face and gentle appearance, beside her sat an 11 or 12-year-old girl with fair skin, brown hair and an oval face. Although not fully developed, she was undeniably a beautiful child. The little girl noticed the arriving Gray family,
Her gaze sweeping over the two adults before settling on Dudian, a trace of surprise flashing in her eyes. At this moment, the middle-aged beauty rose to her feet, smiling at Jura and saying, "Dr. Jura,
"My husband's illness was entirely thanks to you last time. He has official business to attend to today and couldn't make it. I hope you'll forgive us." Gray quickly replied, "Not at all. Mr. A is a busy man. It's we who are presumptuous."
please. Sit." Yes. Gray immediately pulled out a chair and sat down. Perhaps because he was too nervous, the chair legs scraped against the floor with a slight sound.
Several people nearby who had been engaged in quiet conversation immediately glanced over. Upon seeing the white medal pinned to the middle-aged woman's headscarf, however, their expressions changed, and they quickly looked away. After Gray and Jura sat,
The middle-aged woman's gaze fell upon Dudian, who was perched on his chair, a slight surprise flashing in her eyes before softening. She then smiled slightly at Gray and said, "This is the child you adopted, isn't he? So fair-skinned."
Gray's heart leaped at her praise of Dudian. He quickly replied, "Oh, not at all. He's nothing compared to your daughter. She's so beautiful at such a young age and so intelligent. She's clearly inherited your beauty." The middle-aged woman smiled slightly,
Then suddenly said regarding the marriage. Gray's body tensed, and Jura's expression also tightened slightly. "If Anya has no objections, then let's settle it," the middle-aged woman said with unexpected decisiveness. Gray and Jura exchanged a look,
both seeing the surprise in the other's eyes. "Mother." At that moment the little girl suddenly spoke, saying, "I want to go out for a walk with him." Her gaze fell on Dudian. The middle-aged beauty seemed to have anticipated her words.
her smile unchanged as she looked towards Gray and Julia. Gray reacted immediately, saying repeatedly, Certainly. Dean, you accompany Miss Anya for a walk. Remember to take good care of Miss Anya. He patted Dudian on the shoulder, encouraging him.
By this time, Anya had already risen from her seat and turned to walk towards the outside, without glancing at Dudian, nor pausing to wait for him. Dudian, seeing the encouragement and expectation in Gray and Julia's eyes, felt a quiet calm in his heart.
After greeting the middle-aged beauty across from him, he turned and followed behind Anya, leaving the hall together. That child is quite sensible, the middle-aged beauty said with a smile, watching Dudian's back. Yes, yes, Gray hastily responded humbly.
Reaching the street outside, Anya, looking at the young man in the black suit who had followed, gestured with her hand. No need to follow. I'll just walk around nearby. Yes, miss, the young man in the black suit responded, placing a hand over his chest.
After he left, Anya continued walking ahead, without turning around or speaking to Dudian, as if she were strolling alone. Dudian had long since learned to endure loneliness, quietly following behind her, and observing the buildings on both sides of the street.
From these local customs and people, he could infer the approximate living standards and technological level of this world. After walking for a while, Anya suddenly stopped. Dudian, so engrossed in observing his surroundings, almost bumped into her back.
He caught a faint, sweet floral fragrance emanating from her clothes and quickly stepped back to create distance. Anya turned around. Her height advantage, a product of age, placed her half a head taller than Dudian. Her beautiful, snow-white
oval face held no expression as she silently looked down at him. This cold demeanor caused Dudian to subtly suspect something. He calmly looked up at her. Seeing Dudian's calm composure, a hint of surprise flashed in Anya's eyes.
But it quickly returned to its cold expression. She said, "Have you heard of the opera Violet?" Dudian was taken aback. He hadn't expected such an unrelated question and instinctively started to answer no, but Anya didn't give him the chance. Continuing.
No, Dudian was about to say. Do you know how to ballroom dance? Anya's tone was cold, not giving him a chance to reply. By now Dudian understood. This wasn't a polite inquiry, it was an interrogation, a thinly veiled,
contemptuous questioning. He silently stared at the girl. Do you know how to ride? Do you know swordsmanship? Do you have ideals and aspirations? Anya fired 6 questions in rapid succession, then calmly looked at Dudian, saying, "If you're a smart boy,
you should already understand that you and I are not from the same world." Dudian quietly looked at her beautiful face, unexpectedly hearing such sharp and even harsh words coming from the mouth of a girl only 3 or 4 years older than him.
And spoken so matter-of-factly.
The audiobook for chapters 1 to 5 of this issue has concluded. Subscribe to this channel, turn on the notification bell, share, and leave your comments. I will continue to update subsequent content.